Freedom. Here we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the highlight of civilization. Today, I am going to be sharing my secret on how to force your children to love you. Children, so I brought my children here to make sure that I'm credible. Shut up! This is their serious face. All right. So, who loves their daddy?
We do.
All right. You can go. All right. So,
You started laughing. That was not my fault.
all right, here, the honest truth is that they let me live here.
We love our father.
Oh, I love you too. I did want to talk a little bit about parenting. Oh, I love you too. As the title implies, somewhat sarcastically, I do think that there are ways of getting along, not just getting along. I think that it's kind of like I think it's more binary than a lot of people might realize. I think that there are living with anybody is hard. You know, I've been married 20 years. That's been interesting. But anyway, before we get too far along, let's do our simultaneous sip, shall we? All you need is a cup or mug or a glass, tankard, chalice, or stein, canteen, jug, a flask, a vessel of any kind. Fill it with your favorite liquid. I like coffee. And join me now for the unparalleled pleasure, the dopamine hit of the day, the thing that makes everything better. 1, 2, 3. Well, no one is ever going to be able to replace Scott Adams, just like I think nobody can ever replace anybody. But there are some things I've been spending a lot of time the past couple of weeks since his passing, thinking about like a lot of the things that made him extraordinary, and also some things that where he and I are different. And I think one thing that's different is I'm 40. So I'm a lot younger than he is. I still have kids living with me, although my kids are they're a bit unusual. I haven't done any parenting in a while. Like the whole, exercising of authority thing is not something that I kind of let that go somewhat ceremoniously. I was like, all right, children, you're now adults. So my job as their dad is to try to be supportive and not second guess them, and to listen very closely and to help them to find their way. Now that sounds great to those that don't have children. Those that do will hear that and think, won't work. And they'd be right. That generally doesn't work. It doesn't work because it only works under very particular conditions. I began as a very strict parent. When my kids were little, we had very few rules, but the rules that we did have, I enforced very strictly. One is that they be responsible, respectful, and appreciative of each other, and especially their mother, to respect each other. Obviously me, but that was never really an issue. I've got pretty, like, to the extent that my kids could have been troublemakers. I don't know. It's really difficult to kind of parse out the whole nature versus nurture thing. I think a lot of parents tend to do the self-serving bit of, if their kids are doing well, they tend to say it was because of them, meaning the parent. And if kids are not doing well, then they'll start searching for labels. And the honest truth is, it's difficult to know, because every person is unique. So there's that. Then there's also, like, I was a really good, I felt like I was a natural parent for my older daughter, Sume. Whereas for Isla, Sume helped raise Isla. That's probably the easiest way to put it. So my wife raised me in part. I was very ambitious. I was already doing quite well in some areas. Like, I was making a considerable amount of money. I was making more money than a lot of professors at Iowa State University when I was 19. I had started a couple businesses in college. I was hired to help teach by the economics department alongside their graduate students. I was the first undergraduate that they hired ever, which was cool. So that's where I met my wife. She was an incoming PhD student. But I wasn't, like, I had a ton of energy and was willing to take risks and put myself in novel situations and learn really fast. So I was really good at that. But some areas like discipline, focus, and being a really, really good team player, some of those things I wasn't as good at. And then after I got married, really after I met my wife, it started getting better. I just felt myself very motivated to try to do better. And so the way that I like to put it now, this is 20 years later, is my wife helped raise me, and then I helped raise Sume, and then Sume helped raise Isla. So it kind of came from my wife, which is cool. She's from China, and just incredible. I mean, she came from a part of China that was like the developing part of the developing world. So not much there. Bunch of rice paddies. So the culture there, just really radically different, very powerful. I mean, that's one thing I'm hoping that our family hopes to do, is to share more about how Eastern and Western culture can learn from each other and grow together. That's where the word equal comes from, East-West equilibrium. So there's that. So I was a pretty natural parent with Sume, but right out the get-go, there were definitely some things that I was doing differently. one of those things was we just didn't have a lot of rules. We had principles instead of rules. I think principles are really important. Principles over rules. Rules don't require thinking. Principles do. Principles require applying general intelligence. It requires being creative. Like a lot of the mental models that Scott Adams talked about, if you apply it into a parenting lens, which is probably an area where I'll be able to add more value, frankly, just because I'm younger, I've got kids at home, and I've been married 20 years. Like I'm a family guy, right? So I'm a huge Scott Adams fan, but I'm also a family man who's done well for himself financially, and I have a wife that still loves me and children that love me. Like it's pretty good, frankly. So I think on the one hand, I want to share some things about what I think helped make that happen. The kinds of things that we're doing now to try to help survive and thrive in today's very complex world where it seems like a lot of people are throwing poop emojis at each other more than trying to collaborate constructively. So anyway, my wife and I had a bunch of habits. We had a certain culture that we brought to our kids right off the get-go. And I think if you don't have that, then it makes it really difficult to try to take what we did and apply it. I think that there's definitely, I think the most important thing is having a shared vision, shared understanding of right and wrong, shared goals, shared values, being on the same page. Being on the same page, like really being on the same page. I spent a lot of time with my wife. I've always spent a lot of time with my wife. When we started dating, we were just hanging out all the time. And we weren't like dating in the sense of like, oh, let's go out. It was like, no, we were in the library studying most of the time. When we were hanging out, we were either grabbing food between studies or studies. We did go out sometimes, but it was like, let's go ride bikes. And then while we were riding bikes, we would be talking about things that would relate to understanding the world. We would talk about philosophy. We might talk about something that we heard at church. We might talk about a paper that we read or a book we were reading together, or processing ideas. A lot of things that were very relevant to our lives, making decisions together. We made a ton of decisions together. Our decision to come out to Washington, D.C. during the financial crisis was a decision that we made together. The decision of which house to buy after our house fire, the decision of when to have kids, the decision of like which job to take. Like we were always making decisions together because it helped us to avoid making mistakes. That's another use of the word "wequal" that we use here. I mean, we use some of the philosophy that Scott Adams uses that we employ. We try to learn from some of these thought leaders, books, things, and then use some of these terms to think through stuff for ourselves too. It's just a very different kind of culture. It's hard to explain, but I think it definitely starts with if you're married, try to stay married. If you're not married, try to marry somebody that you think you can stay married to. And that I think involves seeing a relationship not through this lens of, through friendship. I think that's true. There's a bunch of debates about how to go about trying to find a spouse. We've both made money. We both have careers. And so it wasn't really about finances. We never needed each other for money. That was never like a driving force behind what helped us stay together. We never stayed together for the kids really either. We very much stayed together for each other. We're very complementary. You know, her strengths are my weaknesses and vice versa. And so, but frankly, I just got really lucky in some ways. I think it's really hard for me to give advice or to even tell my own story. Like, I just met this woman. I didn't really do much dating either. I did date one other person briefly in college, but she turned out to be a lesbian. She found that out later. I hope I didn't do that. So I'm not even really sure if that counts, you know? So, and I wasn't coming from a Christian background of like a religious background either. I just, dating always really confused me. I had trouble understanding the nature of people that would like get into these relationships and then fall out of them and then get into them and fall out of them. And it sounds a lot like the pop culture music that people listen to these days, where it just seems like a lot of what people are doing in their teenage years and in their 20s and into their 30s is basically dating and then breaking up and dating and breaking up. And there's a huge opportunity cost to doing that, that we didn't have to go through. And that just really helped. So not saying I've got the magic ball, the magic 8 ball on that one. I think, I mean, there are some obvious things. Like, I mean, if you meet somebody at a drinking party, as opposed to like meeting somebody in a context, like we met at a church, even though I wasn't Christian, I was just, you know, it's people that are going to church or going to a religious place on the weekends tend to be people that are trying to, at least intentionally, live life in a way that that they think that their like parents will be proud of and that they're going to want to pass on to their children, as opposed to, like, you know, when I've talked to folks who spend a lot of time, you know, dating around, sleeping around, drinking a lot and doing a lot of parties, and like they're not generally looking back at those years as like, oh man, I'm so glad I did that. Like, you know, that's usually not what people say, you know. I think a lot of folks find out later that it's kind of a waste of time and a real distraction from the kinds of activities that actually provide a lot of fulfillment, and can really set you up for just, you know, having more interesting, powerful goals. So, you know, I didn't talk about that much before either, because I think we live in a culture now that, words like woke come to mind, but it's not really about racism or sexism or anything like that. I think it's just that there are certain values of family, like the kinds of things that people have known for a long time were the intrinsically, truly valuable, important things. And one of those things very much is marriage and children. To be committed to somebody as a partner, to be honest and open with them, to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, to try to do better, to even live with somebody, is a valuable exercise, if only because it's a lot harder to hide from yourself. Like, if you have a goal, or if you commit to doing something, or if you fail at something, like whatever you're doing, it's very hard to hide that from a spouse. You shouldn't try, because it can help keep you honest. And so I guess you could say I'm like a huge fan of marriage, like, I think that marriage can be extraordinarily powerful. I think that people make a lot of make it out to be a lot more confusing than it needs to be. There's a lot of great literature on marriage. Um, One of my favorite books, John Gottman, that's on our blog, weequal.com, and a bunch of other ones. That's kind of how that blog started. It was a marriage blog. So there's like a ton of that kind of thing that I feel like is a precursor before one can really start talking about marriage. Because if you have a really solid marriage going into it, going into having children, it makes the whole child thing just way easier. It makes the parenting thing way easier. If you're kind of a little rocky on the marriage side before the kids come, one of the things that a lot of people fall into is they'll start to segregate things. So they'll be like, hey, well, you handle this and I'll handle this. You know, I guess traditionally you might say it's like the man might go out and work, and then the wife, she stays home, watches the kids. We didn't do that. We both worked. Which helped us to have a little more money, which helped us to create opportunities for our kids to have opportunities a lot of other kids didn't have. That's another thing. It's like we were able to send our kids to a Montessori school that was really good when they were 2.5, 3 years old. That was really cool. That was really great. Like they got to have, it was a very good environment. The teachers there were amazing. I went back to visit their old Montessori school a couple of years ago with Sume when she was 13, 14. And it was surreal. They still remembered her and me, and they were still providing just excellent early childhood education. Both my daughters were learning how to read when they were like 3. So the kinds of benefits that I've been able to give my kids were in large part because I married the right person, which in large part was kind of lucky. And but there are some principles that I think helped. There are definitely principles that helped. One of these is, even if the marriage thing was rocky going in, don't segregate. Don't segregate the stuff that you're doing with your children. Talk to each other. And just be some Scott Adams wisdom. You're just potato parents. You know, you're both doing the best you can. Like every parent instinctively, you should just assume that your spouse is trying, even if they're not actually doing much. It's probably because they're struggling. There's a lot of struggle and pain and suffering in the world right now. And if you're married to somebody, it's your job to try to help lift them up. It's your job. If your spouse is in pain, like whatever, you know, if you have like and get off all these social platforms. Generally speaking, these social platforms are going to make you jealous and envious and confused about what relationships are. I think it's some of the social media is probably like the worst cesspool in the world for bad ideas regarding healthy, powerful marriages. I haven't really seen a lot on social media. Like I know Chamath recently did an interview with his wife. I didn't like it. It just seemed very performative, very like, well, just the whole status game, and you know the game that Scott Adams didn't play, you know, just like streaming from his kitchen. You know, I think it's so cool that his ex-wife was seemingly kind of came back or was maybe always there in his life even after the marriage. I think that's so cool. Wow. Hey, beautiful.
Hey.
I'm supposed to talk about kids, but I started talking about marriage because I feel like if you're going to start talking about parenting, you got to start with marriage. You know? That's my wife. She's great. Don't hide things from your kids. Just don't. I mean, there's some obvious things. Like the other day, I let out, like, I took a huge shit. I was like, whoa, kid, I did. And they're like, Dad, don't tell them. I'm like, I'm sorry, but it's, I want to show up. Like, I mean, I share a lot, is my point. I'm very transparent. They find out. Like, I think this is what happens. A lot of my friends are suffering from this stuff. Friends in the sense that I think that we also live in a culture that's so. If you see somebody doing well and they're teenagers, like, love them, and like things are going good, and that isn't the case for you, then we seem to be in this world where there's a lot of. I think social media has created something of a competitive nature. Like Facebook seems to largely be a way of trying to guess whether or not your kids are doing better than other kids. So I don't use Facebook. I haven't in a long time. Neither does my wife. None of our family members none of us are on Facebook. But like basically for the first 12 years of your kid's life, they're going to accept what it is that you're saying. Even if they don't act on it, they're going to feel like whatever you're saying is true. It's just something about the nature of young people. I'm not saying that they'll say that they believe that it's true, but the gravity of what parents are telling their children and especially how they behave, the values that parents have will be self-evident in the nature of what they're doing. Like, I didn't do any live streaming on YouTube by myself before my kids were already teenagers, which in our mind, kind of like the Jewish culture, like they're adults now. Like if you're biologically able to have sex and make a baby, if that's physically possible for you, even if that's not a good idea in our modern day culture, like your brain and your biology and everything that you are genetically is adult. So shouldn't you be capable of taking care of yourself? And so that's something that my wife definitely, like my wife and I were coming at this from. Like we went into parenting from the get-go knowing that by the time our kids were 13, we better be done raising them. Because at that point, your ability to have influence over them is really dependent on them, as it should be, because they're biologically adults. Even if our culture's fallen apart and we've got like 20-something-year-olds in college that can't even do reading assignments, so now professors are reading to their kids like they're in kindergarten. Just because we're in that culture doesn't mean that biologically a 13-year-old doesn't feel like they're supposed to be doing real things, because they're an adult according to their actual biology. So basically, if you know that you've got 12 years to try to share everything you can and give everything you can to your kids. And at that point, though, if at 13 plus, they start to become like aware, and then they can look back and they're going to start to judge you, okay? As a parent, they're going to judge you. They're going to judge you first and foremost. Were my parents honest with me? Were they honest? That's it. That's the key. If you want your children to love you, if you want to force them to love you, just kind of tongue in cheek, but it'll work. Even if your marriage is falling apart, even if you screwed up horribly somehow over and over again for years, if you're honest with your children before 13, now I think that they will love you anyway, even after. So this applies across the board, but it's especially true in a way that's almost like built into their DNA, kind of like when puberty hits. It's just sort of there. If you are honest and transparent, I don't just mean honest like you never told a lie. Look up Ray Dalio on TED, Radical Transparency. If you are, so for example, if you're not sure what to do, tell your kids. I told them all the time. I was like, hey, I think it's important for you to have certain chores. This would be like a conversation I have with Sume when she was 5. Like, hey, I think that it's important, even before 5, for you to contribute to the family as a way of learning about how humans work together, because we're social mammals. And, Sume would just be like, oh, okay. And I'd be like, well, the challenge is that you're only 5. So there's, not a lot of things that you can do, but you can do some things. What are some things around the house that you see that mommy and daddy do that you think you might be able to help with? And she would legit sit there and she'd just be thinking, 5-year-old Sume, just like, well, I could do this, could do that, right? Pouring milk for her and her sister in the morning before going off to Montessori school, that kind of thing, being able to pick out her own clothes. Like, as soon as they were able to do things for themselves, if they could physically do it, even if it took like, I don't know, a few weeks of practice, that they would do it. So yeah, I think that's also another part of this would be like treating kids with an air of like, hey, we're part of the same team here. Now again, that requires a level of strict adherence to principles. So maybe I should touch on that a little bit, because if you don't have rules, then how you navigate principles becomes really important, because you do want to draw it back to certain rules. So for example, my kids knew that they shouldn't just like leave their toys all over the living, for example. They knew that was something that they shouldn't do, but it wasn't because we didn't have a rule about it. We had principles. One of those principles would be like, rule number 1 was have fun. We had one rule, and it was have fun. And then I'll probably leave with this one, because I could talk about this forever, but the big one is honesty. That's the big one. Especially just admitting that you don't know about things and trying not to hide things from your children, because they'll find out when they're teenagers, and they will eat you alive when they find out. They'll just see inconsistencies. And if you have inconsistencies between your actions and what you say, then you can kind of get away with manipulating yourself and your children, and they won't really know and understand. There will be things that bother them, and they will find out what those things are when they're teenagers. But if you've been honest with them and open with them about what you're trying to do, about what you're trying to teach them, about the why, the why behind everything that you're doing. If you explain it, they'll understand you, and they'll see how hard you're trying, hopefully. And then it becomes really easy to navigate how to improve those things, because they're going to have new perspectives. that they can bring to you as teenagers. Be like, hey, Dad, there's this thing you've been saying, but here's the thing you've been missing. I'll just be like, it's fascinating. They're very helpful. But this rule number 1, have fun, is great. It's like, because it's not any fun to have somebody call you a name that's not nice, or to generally be the subject of disrespectful behavior, or even to be dishing it out is not fun. It's also not fun if in a shared living space, there's a ton of stuff lying around that's kind of cluttering it up in a shared space, so you can draw back to this principle of have fun. Like, hey, are we all helping each other to have fun? This is the principle. How can we live by this? How can we do a better job of bringing positive emotions to each other? So by tying it back, it's like same thing with like having a cavity, right? Like you don't want to have a cavity. So, maybe going to the dentist isn't the most fun thing, but what's even less fun is having that same dentist needing to pull out a drill and then insert that drill into your face. That's not fun. And so you can use that same principle to be like, well, so it may not seem like it's fun to brush your teeth, but you're still actually maximizing fun in the long run if you brush your teeth every day, twice a day, and use mouthwash and floss, right? Although we did have 3 other principles that we talked about. And you can see this in a bunch of, like my kids wrote a bunch of essays. Sumi's probably written over 1,000 essays. A lot of structured thinking in this house. A lot of shared projects. With those 3 principles: freedom, kindness, and service. Freedom, kindness, and service. To be free means to have liberty. So, for example, my kids, if they wanted to have a trashy room, they could. Although they wouldn't call it trashy. For a long time, they had enormous, elaborate forts in their room. And they shared a room, even though they had 2 different rooms, but they liked sharing a room a lot of the time. They don't right now, but they did for a long time. And having the freedom to organize your space however you want, like that's just an area where I see a lot of parents struggling, is that they'll have this impression in their head of what it is that their kids need to do, but it involves a whole lot of things that are not really rooted in first principle thinking. It's more precedent of like, well, other people do this, or my parents made me do this, and it did this good thing for me. But there isn't a lot of thought around setting those expectations and having your own young people, your children, involved in the thought process, right? So if they're living out behaviors without understanding the why behind them, the scaffolding, the foundational thinking, the principles that are deriving the behavior, they can't take ownership of it. They don't understand why it's there. They're just doing it. And if in behaviors that are not built from shared understanding, but are just sort of habits, or if it's coming, sometimes it can just, a lot of it in households can just be like a certain fear of like, well, I want to make sure that my room is clean because what if my mom sees it and she's like, Jimmy, oh my God, like you need to clean your room. It looks like a pigsty, and it's like, so why is he cleaning his room? Because his mom might see it. So then if he goes to college or maybe in the future when he's married, and it's still a pigsty, it's because he never built his own understanding of why he was doing what he was doing. Right? So there are costs to trying to impose one's will and understanding on children that one can get to do the things that you want them to do. That's the thing. It'll work until they're 12. And then after that, so I think that's where it's kind of like trying to use these social platforms, like the way they're designed, similar kind of thing. You can think you're moving in the right direction because they'll set it all up so that you're like you think you're making progress. You think you're getting what you want, but really you're just kind of being manipulated. I think that when it comes to kids, you really have to put yourself in their situation and try to help them build an understanding. You're giving them the gift of agency when you do that. And they definitely need that if they're going to be the kind of people that will survive and thrive in today's radically different world. One that awards agency, creative intelligence, emotional intelligence, free will, communication, collaboration, all the things that that are complements instead of substitutes to robots and AI. So it's more important now than ever, that's for sure. Because just getting kids to be obedient, you can just build agents to do that for you now. So a lot of people are going to lose their jobs because their parents just trained them to be robots. And then schools reinforced it, and then college reinforced it, and then another decade in the workforce reinforced it. And by the time they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, they've been basically doing things they've been told what to do without understanding why their entire lives. So, give your kids the gift of free will and agency. Don't impose a bunch of rules on them. Be honest and transparent. Help them build an independent understanding so that they can actually navigate this world that's changing so fast. You'll be grateful in your 40s. I'm 40 now, man. Am I grateful to have 2 daughters looking out for me, helping me navigate? We're part of a team. So, it's been a great week. I'm very grateful to Scott Adams and the people around him, the people that spoke at his funeral, the people that I'm meeting that were part of his community. I'm just very grateful for that. It's been a great week. I'm going to keep doing this. If only for myself and my family and my own children and our own small community, it's been great. I've been getting a lot of positive feedback. So thank you all and have a great weekend.